Europeans of Reddit, what's the big news event right now that Americans probably don't know about? Story 1. Serbia has been protesting for more than 4 months now after roof of railway station in Novi Sad collapsed on 1st of November, killing 16 people. Students barricaded universities around the country, and UNIS haven't been working for all this time. They also have been walking for miles and miles to protests in different cities in order to spread the word and connect to people. They won't stop until their demands for justice and systems changes are met. Professors and school teachers that support them stopped getting paid. Government used acoustic sound weapon on protesters a week ago, but continues to deny that. Direct democracy is on the rise among people, but dictatorship is on the rise in the government. Additionally, our neighbors North Macedonia, Greece, Hungary, Turkey, and bit further, Georgia also had their mass protests against autocratic and corrupt governments. Serbia stands with them. You can frequently see Greek and Macedonian signs on protests these days. Edited after further context in the comment about the regional situation. Story 2. Serbia, Hungary, Greece, Romania, Slovakia, Georgia, and Turkey are all having protests against government corruption and have anti-Russia sentiments. A Balkan Spring as you could call it. Story 3. Well, for the Americans who don't know, Conor McGregor is almost certainly guilty of rape and almost certainly plans on running for president of Ireland. Luckily that's just a ceremonial job, but Christ on a bike, do we not want him having the slightest modicum of power on the world stage? I say all this because someone on your side of the pond elected to bring that to the White House. Story 4. There is a pre-war atmosphere in Europe. Last October, Sweden distributed a brochure to prepare its citizens for an imminent threat. Now, this summer, the French will receive a survival manual at home to know how to act in case of a national emergency or an imminent threat. In addition, news came out today that Brussels is calling for European households to stockpile emergency supplies in case of a climate crisis or war. Europe must prepare for a potential war, also for cyber attacks, pandemics and the terrible effects of the climate crisis, warns the European Commission. Brussels is calling for all European households to have stocks of water, medicines, batteries and food to subsist for 72 hours without outside help in the event of a crisis. It is one of the guidelines of the Union's preparedness strategy, which will be presented by the Community Executive on Wednesday. Story 5. I suspect a lot of Americans are unaware of how IC has been detaining tourists from countries like Canada, France and Germany, and doing so for an indefinite period of time, without letting these people have access to a lawyer, and often in horrible conditions. I was asked by a group of Americans at my job about whether I'd go visit the US at some point, and when I brought this story about IC up as the reason why I wouldn't, they all seemed shocked to learn about it. There were 8 people in that group. Story 6. I'm saying Australia counts because of Eurovision. We're about to have an election in the next month where it is literally a Republican versus Democrat election round 2 electric boogaloo. Our conservative called the Liberal Party has started to spit Trumpist lines in his press conferences, and our liberal left called Labour with No You Party is running a bump in healthcare funding. The polls are so tight there is a massive chance of a hung parliament because of independents and the Greens. We are one election away from having a bald potato Trump. Story 7. Another Pulse nightclub tragedy that didn't reach most American news outlets. On March 16, 2025, a fire at a DNK concert killed at least 59 people including the entire band except for one dude. It was caused by pyrotechnics. It is the deadliest nightclub fire in Europe since the 2015 Bucharest nightclub fire, and the deadliest fire in North Macedonia's history. Super tragic. Source edit for the record, I'm not European. I saw it on Wikipedia's homepage and was confused because it said Pulse nightclub, yet it was super recent and in Macedonia. I ended up listening to some DNK songs. They were super talented and it's tragic. RIP. Story 8. Meanwhile, Asia also exists. There are massive wildfires going on in both Japan and Korea after weeks of bone-dry weather. Thousands of hectares of forest and hundreds of structures have burned. Story 9. I'm from a small town in England. According to the local Facebook group, immigrants are ruining the town, or not ruining the town. Nobody is really sure at this point. They're definitely up to something. Nigel Farage is either the devil or going to save the UK. Nobody can agree on that. The bypass they have been promising for 80 years hasn't been built yet. People are salty about that. Some drama about a primary school not having an Easter service this year. Exciting stuff. Story 10. There is now an $840 billion plan underway to rearm Europe, effectively making it a superpower and bringing the era of American dominance to an end. Edit. Lots of comments on this. Sorry, I have no interest in arguing on the internet. I won't reply. Let me clarify my position. This is a terrible thing that's happening. If you are working class, you'll be the one in the upcoming wars. Trump is stupid for squandering American power in Europe, but he seems to be doing it in advance of grabbing mineral-rich territories for resources big tech companies need. All the bourgeois powers will be doing some version of this soon because capital needs to constantly expand or collapse. Story 11. Norway. The biggest local news event is that a kindergarten went on a ski trip and had a great time. Eric says he fell once, but it didn't hurt and he had an orange in his backpack that didn't take any damage. A big national news event is that they found even more proof of abuse of patients at a gross doctor's house. Story 12. In France, the Prime Minister has lied about his knowledge and cover-up of a violence and pedophile scandal at a private Catholic school, so the government is currently distracting the population by banning Islamic veils from sports competitions. Just Islamic veils. not crosses or whatever religious symbol under the name of Lasset. Story 13. While we don't have Trump, we have our own bunch of corrupted, greedy politicians. Europe is not a liberal paradise, far from it. We face the same pressing issues with a rise in the cost of living, especially energy price since this freaking war in Ukraine started. The level of corruption at both national and EU level is high. While we still enjoy better healthcare and affordable access to health services, we face increasingly higher taxes for public services that continue to deteriorate, including hospitals, education, and security. Story 14. The war in Sudan, ongoing since 2023 with millions on the run and the most horrifying atrocities, barely gets any coverage compared to other conflicts, but it's one of the worst humanitarian crises right now. Story 15. Similar to the US, a whole ton of cuts are being made in the UK right now, and it's causing a similar backlash. The people who will be most harmed are those who are most vulnerable. It is seen by many to be justifiable given the current circumstances of the war, but I'd prefer we just hit the Americans with retaliatory tariffs to pay for it instead. Story 16. We are currently issuing travel warnings to the US. Secretly, a lot of Europeans hope we can have less dependencies and relationships with you, and hopefully not get nuked in the process. Story 17. The funniest thing is that a lot of European countries have better news stations than the US does. They don't put fake news when talking about America and tell it like it is. I remember there was a big article about Mayor de Blasio and his wife losing $8 million. Articles were hidden in New York, Googled under Google IT, and the article was the first result. Should be asking what's happening in America that we don't know about as well. Right now, TikTok is the best news source, and that says something. Story 18. Ironically, I'm an American, but I like to stay on top of things. Serbia, Turkey, Hungary, Romania, and likely a few other Eastern European countries are seeing mass protests, all directed at the current leadership. Their government's reactionist policies haven't been addressing the underlying issues, and that combined with corruption has made people unhappy. The reform movement in the UK is apparently imploding over unsure leadership, with Labour seemingly backing down on a number of motions it ran on, including possible cuts with little to no support for the NHS. Brexit is also still a topic of contention, with more and more people wanting to rejoin the EU. Gaza is tentatively seeing a ceasefire, but this being what it is, hard to tell how long it'll last and how well it'll go. Canada may or may not put into serious consideration in joining the EU with what's been going on between the country and the USA. Ireland, for maybe the first time in decades, has been ramping up military spending alongside other smaller EU states, mostly in reaction to Russian aggression in Ukraine. Story 19. Let's not forget the metal strike against Tesla in Sweden, which began on October 27, 2023, and has become one of the longest labor conflicts in Swedish history. The strike was initiated because Tesla refuses to sign a collective agreement with the union, challenging the Swedish labor model, where approximately 90% of the workforce is covered by collective agreements. Story 20. As an American, this thread makes me so sad for two reasons. 1. This administration has painted the American people as supportive of this backward political landscape, when in reality, even a huge percentage of Trump voters are livid with the way he has treated our allies and friends too. I, along with many Americans, know about 90% of the things mentioned in the comments. The uneducated, unbothered, loudmouth group of Americans have officially cemented the rest of us into the ignorant and selfish perception. I miss living in Europe and cannot wait for the next election. Story 21. The Netherlands, a small country 18 mi west of Germany, quickly wants to increase its army from 75,000 people to 200,000 people. They accept anyone now, so they claim. Story 22. I need more posts about this. I'm in America, and I can't even search TikTok for message for Americans. TikTok America has a notice that says this search is related to videos that violate our community guidelines. We are in trouble. Story 23. This week in France, formerly French and now Russian actor Gerard Depardieu is on trial for assault. There are several plaintiffs, and they are a drop in the bucket among all the complaints about his assaults and rapes over the years, some of them documented for decades, including in mainstream media where it was presented as part of his persona. He's on track to be our Weinstein. Story 24. I appreciate this thread so much. As an American, I do read international news, but because I'm in America, most of it is only filtered for the Americas, specifically North America, and I have to go digging for any other news. Also, does anyone want to adopt a 49-year-old woman with 7 critters? I am funny as. Story 25. South Africa's coalition government is at loggerheads over a proposed budget that would require a VAT increase. In a country hounded by extreme poverty, this is seen as a very unpopular move. Meanwhile, this same budget includes salary increases for an already disproportionately large and well-paid and arguably ineffectual civil service. Story 26. UK economy is in big trouble. Debt interest now huge, bigger than education budget. Debt approaching 100 of GDP. Our crappy productivity per capita is depressing. Population due to reach 85 m on a crowded island, England 434 people per sqkm, but we don't produce enough. Left-wing government needing to cut spending as we desperately need to up defense spending. Gloomiest country in Europe just now. Story 27. That the people in charge of the US are a massive security risk to the US and a risk to their prosperity. It's not a singular event though, more of a pattern. Story 28. There is a possibility that Potato Trump will be elected as Prime Minister in Australia this year. Lord Potato Head, a.k.a. a lord, is a known misogynist and racist and used his position in cabinet for his own personal benefit. Preparation for the next Eurovision. It's all we Euros care about. Story 29. We're all backing away from any dependence on the US as they have shown they're not reliable or friendly anymore. Business deals, investments, defense spending, security, trade, etc., etc. Everyone rushing to cut dependence on America almost as fast as they dropped Russia after they invaded Ukraine. Story 30. Here in Denmark we are talking about two things. 1. Greenland and how up America is acting. 2. A prominent former politician was indicted for possessing thousands of images and videos of child abuse material as well as a childlike doll. Other than that, sun is out and spring is here, so that's nice. Story 31. In my country, our government refuses to listen to the victims nor do an inquiry about the constant grooming gangs that are running rampant across the country. They also imprison those for online comments if they are offensive. Edit, downvote all you want, but it's the truth. Story 32. That your international tourism industry is collapsing. Aside from regular tourists being picked up by ICE and the travel warnings being issued by various governments, no one wants to support or visit. Canadian bus companies are canceling left and right. Package trips to Florida, city breaks in New York. All disappearing due to lack of demand. It's going to cost the US billions in lost revenue. One quote I read from a US travel broker: COVID was a kid's party compared to the shit show we're looking at. Story 33. The two people that stole the Paddington Bear statue were sentenced today. They both got community service and a fine. Both of them are RAF engineers and brought the statue back to base with them, so I'm guessing they're in for a proper kicking off their seniors. Story 34. No clue what Americans don't know about. Probably quite a lot. With your local troubles, or maybe it depends on in what media prison you are currently. Story 35. The leader of the Serb-dominant region of Bosnia is defying arrest, breaking the constitution and threatening to raise an army. He's a separatist. The arrest warrant for him hasn't been filled because local police from his region would likely protect him. He's also been sentenced to jail and banned from politics, but he's still there. It's very complicated and not easy to explain quickly, so I think it's been way underreported, even in Europe. Story 36. I'm really late to see this, but wanted to say a huge thank you to all that contributed and spread the news from the land that you are standing on. I'm sitting here in UK watching the ITV news and it's Trump. Went away for 10 minutes, came back and still Trump. We don't get enough European news here, so little that when I lived in Germany for a while some years ago and heard the word Berlin on the radio, I immediately imagined that they were going to play Take My Breath Away. I only wish that everyone had stated their country. Story 37. I'm American, and we watch America now hoping to get real-world news. We've had it with our stupid president and biased news outlets. P.S. World. We are sorry that the US are right now about to become a fascist country without noticing it. Story 38. Just to say, if you want high-quality global news and analysis in the English language, then the World Service is hard to beat. It's so American to assume that the same news event aside from like, Ukraine would be making equal headlines across the entirety of Europe. Oh, those national headlines in the country of Europe. Story 39. Global warming. If most Americans knew what we're heading into, they would have voted differently. To be fair, most Europeans are not that much better. Story 40. Apart from the US making direct threats to invade by Greenland, the dominating news story in Denmark the past few days is that a former minister and former member of parliament has been charged for possession of child pornography and a child-sized doll with a crotch opening. Story 41. Teslas are taking hit big time. They weren't hugely popular, but it's got worse. You can't buy a Cybertruck in the UK. It's not deemed road legal by the DVLA. Mango Mussolini and Tango Tyrant have become fun new nicknames for Trump. Story 42. The fact that you can publicly protest instead of sitting at home watching sports, eating junk food and complaining on social media about your government. Story 43. Right now, farmers are revolting all over Europe, protesting EU policies and climate regulations. But Americans wouldn't know, because they're too busy arguing whether drag queens or vaccines are the real threat to democracy. Meanwhile, half of Congress thinks Europe is a province in Canada. Story 44. Eric Klopper's announcement. The Intact Global Conference on March 29th to 31st in Portland, Oregon, will be suing the state on constitutional grounds to ensure that all children are protected from medically unnecessary genital cutting in America like circumcision. Story 45. In the UK we're having pushback against our crappy government from all sides at the moment, the latest one being nationwide protests from disabled people regarding cuts to the personal independence payment system that was already considered cruel and bureaucratic. Story 46. Croatia people, spring is here. Yes, everything is expensive, but it is warm outside, trees jetting green. Meteorologist breaking news, it will rain all week. Story 47. UK financial year is coming to an end. The individual saving account allowances will be reset on April 5th. These allowances are the major cause for general public not to invest in SP 500 or FTSE All World, even if the prices are low. After the reset, the UK is going to create a significant demand on stock market. Story 48. Half of Eastern Europe and Turkey is on different level of strikes protests for weeks now. Hopefully a lot of change is coming in the coming months. Story 49. In Kamada, we're stealing our resolve to support Canadian business and forge new trade relations with Europe who we trust. We're also amid a federal election campaign. Canada courtesy of Madame Jolie. our kick-ass foreign affairs minister has taken out billboards across America to remind them that tariffs hurt regular people most. Story 50. The supposedly left-wing government in the UK is doubling down on all the extremely conservative policies introduced by the previous right-wing government. So both of the main parties are into deporting all immigrants and killing the disabled. If you're into human rights, there's no major parties for you. And good luck moving à nouvelle Elzebekause Brexit. Story 51. That their country is being hijacked by a small Russian-friendly group that aims to divide the country among themselves in small states run by trillionaires. Story 52. A former government minister in Denmark has been charged with possession of thousands of files of child pornography and possession of a doll looking like a child. Story 53. A UN judge in the UK from Uganda has been convicted of forcing a woman that works for her into slavery. Story 54. I don't know if the Americans have noticed yet, but we're all pretty sure they aren't a democratic republic anymore. I know it's like, your country, I can't explain why we are more aware than Americans. I don't think I ever will be. Story 55. Social Security works so no one needs to die of morbid obesity and no one feels the need to buy guns any day of the year, because the only gun culture promoted here is about shotgun thrush hunting. Also, there's a party inside my pants but you're not invited. General hygiene literacy. Story 56. I watched the acoustic sound weapon on protesters but had no idea protests have been going on for 4 months. I assume that one is not working because they are protesting, so correct me if I'm wrong. If that's the case, how does one pay for rent and food? What about if you get sick or hurt? Story 57. A railway station roof collapsed in Serbia, killing 16 people. This incident has caused mass protest across the country. Let that sink in. Let that change your way of life. Let that affect you to bring some revolution. Let that burn your ignorance over every incident around you. Let that stop you being selfish, and finally let this statement make you a human being. U is for the people who live in every security-threatening country. U is for the people who allowed such incident be normal in their country. U is for the people probably in Mexico, school shooting US, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and many other underdeveloped nations. Story 58. Please don't put the Romanian protests in the same bucket. We've had a string of protests from the supporters of former pro-Russian presidential candidate Călin Georgescu, who were upset our constitutional court did its job and actually upheld our democracy by canceling and redoing our elections. Will take place in May now, when the scale of Russian interference was uncovered illegal, according to electoral law, for foreign states to get involved. And a second wave upon them deciding he's not allowed to run in the second election because of him breaking electoral law during the first round of elections and ties to legionary movement, which is also illegal. These people are not protesting against corruption or autocratic regimes. They are protesting against the EU, NATO, and the desire of many Romanians to not go back to communism and under Russia's umbrella, and also because they have been brainwashed to believe this guy is their messiah. Very different things. We also had a pro-European demonstration, but that's not really a protest. Story 59. Europeans would defy their governments with wooden spoons and an inkling of hope. America has more guns per capita than citizens, yet people won't even leave their homes. Story 60. Please don't stop until Putin's stooges are in prison cells, or at least on the curb. I've got co-workers from most of those countries and an out-of-touch Swiss boss who said verbatim to us, so you all just spent the weekend watching TV, the news, and calling your friends. Story 61. While I agree that Putin needs to be stopped, I don't see the relationship between the protests you're mentioning and an anti-Russia sentiment. These are driven mostly by domestic political issues. Just trying to get the facts straight here. Edit down, vote all you like. Facts are facts. Story 62. The problem is that in most of those countries, there is a strong mafia, and it is tightly aligned with Russian mafia or an extension of. This makes it more difficult to break away, since the party in control, which you are trying to overthrow, does not even have allegiance to your country, and has no rules to be accountable to. Story 63. Meanwhile, the US is chill, economy in freefall, constitution ignored, economic war waging, destroying all ties to 80 years of allies, thinking about expansion, kissing some Russian. All good. You don't need protests. Soon it will be illegal to protest anyway. Story 64. I'm impressed with all the small protests going on in the States, but Europe does it right when it comes down to sending a message to government. We gotta start a coalition to unite everyone to stand up against Trump. Story 65. Sorry, are you European? As this is a common inaccuracy reported in the US, that European protests are related to something else, usually something US related. Story 66. Sorry, but none of those countries except Serbia are Balkan, so it's not Balkan Spring, but it does make other Balkan countries also look around at their problems, and maybe it will wake something up. Story 67. That is an absolute stretch saying any of these protests bar possible the Georgian and Slovakian ones are anti-Russian in sentiment. Romania's protests could be said to be even sympathetic to a more neutral stance towards Russia due to the crackdown, arrest and banning from running of the leading opposition candidate, who holds a more neutral view towards Russia, Serbia, Hungary. Anti-Russia sentiments really. Story 68. Recently the protests seem to be not effective, even if common. I recall just 2 recent cases, when protesting on the ground led to a government change: Ukraine in 2014 and Armenia in 2018. Coincidentally, for both countries these changes brought some pain related to behavior from a neighbor who got emboldened, motivated to change the status quo, Maybe it is less likely elsewhere in Europe, though in this does NATO still exist, it is hard to say anything for sure. Story 69 Hungarian here. There are a few largish protests here and there, but nothing major. Unfortunately, they're usually organized well in advance. The most recent spontaneous one was because the freedom of assembly was limited even further, making it mandatory to get a permit from the state to organize protests and allowing police to use facial recognition to find those protesting illegally. All this under the guise of banning the pride because children need to be protected from harmful LGBTQ influence. We're mostly waiting for the next election in April 2026 and hoping to finally get rid of this filth. Story 70 Unfortunately, with one gone, now in Romania we have two, Victor Ponta and George Simeon. They don't outwardly promote that CG said, but they did show themselves to be very similarly inclined and singing the tune of the far-right nutjob voters that voted with CG. So far they are showing to poll pretty high against everyone else. Both of them should be dismissed from the possibility, as Simic himself did a Trumpo not long ago and called for violence. The protesters hurt some local businesses and randoms at a restaurant, and then he quickly made a TikTok denouncing it. And don't even get me started on Ponta. I think nothing changed for us sadly. They are now bragging how the far-right protest always so bug and that the pro-EU demonstration was barely a few thousand. Story 71 This one's actually covered a lot in the US. Well, maybe not a lot because of all the madness going on here and the coming storm, but Turkey still makes mainstream media news. It's covered even more by independent media and social media in the US though. Story 72 That one is all over the place here. Serbia got a mention with the sonic weapon, Haiti has been low tier in the news forever, and the Sudan thing is here too. Story 73 The gasp I gasped when I tuned into a White House press conference and McGregor was chatting away could never be replicated. As a Canadian, I thought we had seen the worst of Trump Musk thus far, but I fear the levels of depravity go all the way down to. Story 74 My soul died a little when he was on our White House podium. The way he put his hands on it like he was living some sick delusional egotistical power rush. I hope he doesn't get to do that in Ireland. I really hope you guys block him. Y'all deserve so much better. Story 75 We don't need to worry about him. To become President, McGregor needs to be backed by 4 county councils or 20 members of the Oireachtas, our version of Congress. Nobody in the Oireachtas will support him. We have no far-right parties in Ireland and Conor McGregor is universally hated here, particularly in rural areas. Any politician of county councillor that backs him will not win re-election. What I do fear will be the reaction to him being blocked from the presidency. Trump and his shower will almost certainly be outraged by this, and could target Ireland. I do also fear there could be a violent reaction from people who are chronically online and support McGregor. Story 76 If someone only read your second paragraph, they would have no idea you were talking about Conor McGregor and would have just assumed that you were referring to as Trump. Story 77 He was roundly booed at Limp Bizkit twice and again at Shane Gillis he was booed when mentioned. Even if he could get a nomination, unlikely due to the requirements but not impossible, I doubt he has a sniff. If he did have a nomination, though there will be a lot of Musk money and the discourse during the election will be so vile and negative. Story 78 It's annoying that people think he would be able to just start mass deportations if he got in, and they're going to use that as ammo when he doesn't get on the ballot. The president does have some power, but they are not the leader of the country. They're basically the face of our country in the international context, and I don't want to like McGregor representing us.